First, I want to thank you guys for being here with me today. And I want to start by having you just introduce yourself, tell me your name, your title, what you do, and I'm going to start on the end with Mike.
All right, my name is Mike, marketer and community activist here in San Diego.
Okay. Sir?
I'm Tony Young, and I'm the CEO of Rise San Diego.
All right, and you, sir?
Hello, my name is Armand King. I am the COO and co-founder of Paving Great Futures.
Okay, so I am going to start with our eldest statement here because I want to get some historical perspective. I'd like for you to first talk to me about the George Floyd case and just give me your personal thoughts about it, when it happened, what you were thinking last year, and how it impacted you.
Well, obviously, all of us were dismayed and disgusted what we saw. I couldn't help but think that this is something that happens and has happened for a number of years in our communities. It's something that I've heard about. I've been a part of advocating against that type of behavior by the police department for a long time. And this is just one of those things that is indicative of what has happened for a long time here in this country. I remember on the council, as a city council member, there are many times where a police officer would be accused of doing something like this. However, there was no video, it was only his word against the person who was accosted word, and it always was dropped. And so this was a seminal moment, I think, for us.
I know that you are old enough to remember the Rodney King trial and incident as well. Did that bring back memories of what happened in LA almost 30 years ago or 30 years ago?
It did, and you know, the Rodney King incident was its own incident, but again, this is an incident that reflects things that have happened over and over and over again in this community, in Minnesota, and all parts of the country, and really, as you can see, all parts of the world. These things happen where authority, the police department abuses their power. And so it did bring up and invoke images of Rodney King, but it also invoked images of San Diego also, and that's the part that really hit home for me.
Can you remember a specific case in San Diego where something like this happened? Was it caught on videotape? I'm pretty new here, so maybe you can enlighten me.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing. Videotapes, video has really changed the dynamic here, right? Because it was always easy for a police officer to say, this is what happened. They write in the report, and if you don't have video for it, then it's, you know, back in the day, it was their word, right? And it's still that way, because you're not always going to catch a video of all of this. But yeah, there's instances in my mind where things like have happened in our community where, you know, a person was killed or beat, or there have been constituents that come to tell us that there was some kind of issue, and they had no response. There was no recourse to address some of these issues that have happened between police and community relations. And that's the disappointing part with us. And, you know, videos have changed things. However, we have to recognize that we're not videotaping everything that happens in this country.
All right, thank you. Mike, I want to go to you. What were your initial thoughts when you saw the video of George Floyd in Minneapolis?
To be completely honest, I couldn't bring myself to watch most of the video until very recently. After the jury went into deliberations, there were a number of media outlets that decided to play the video in its entirety with a timer counting up to 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And that was the moment when I said, I'm going to watch this in its entirety. And it was heartbreaking, because I saw myself on the ground. I felt myself finding it difficult to breathe, just like he did. And so when I'm watching that and I'm seeing myself and I'm seeing my son and I'm seeing my father and my loved ones in that same position, just if it just happens to be the wrong cop on the wrong stop, it's heartbreaking. It makes you feel hopeless, helpless. And like the people who you would normally cry out to for help are there murdering this man. You asked Mr. Young about incidents in San Diego. We very recently in El Cajon had Mr. Alongo, whose family called for help. He was having a mental health crisis, and he didn't come out of that incident alive. They called for help, and our police came with guns to solve a mental health crisis. So it's something where we are constantly dealing with the fear of even asking for help from those who are charged with public service.
Okay. Armand, do you agree and find that watching videos like this repeatedly, because of course we know this is not the only one, do you find it to be traumatic for you?
Extremely traumatic, and honestly, I hate to say used to it. I was a kid watching Rodney King, you know, learning about Sagan Penn right here in San Diego. Alfred Alongo, as soon as that Alfred Alongo situation happened, I had my boots on the ground and I was out there feeling the hurt and the pain of our people right here in San Diego. And even after George Floyd, the verdict, I mean, just during the case, we had several instances that were recorded on film, or we heard of, thought it was a taser, thought it was a gun, thought it was a gun. We've seen this, what we just seen with a uniformed military officer, that getting pepper sprayed and treated like that, even that didn't matter, that you were in the United States military. And this is something I've witnessed myself personally in my face, seeing my best friend's sister at 16 years old picked up and slammed with a shotgun put on her that had nothing to do with committing any crime or anything. I've witnessed this myself personally. So used to it, I'm actually shocked at the verdict, and it shouldn't be that way. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate just a little bit. So what do you say to people who say, well, he shouldn't have been resisting? You have to comply. What does that, what sort of emotion or thoughts do you think, or what comes to mind when you hear that?
Yeah, that triggered me right when you said that.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Absolutely.
the man was handcuffed
Right.
on the ground with a knee on his neck, and to think that he had any opportunity to create any problem for the officer is ridiculous. And I think that's what the jury found and said.
You see how comfortable he was. There was no resistance. The man's hand was in his pocket, looking forward.
It feels like officers are not officially trained, but get locker room training to just say out loud, why are you resisting? Stop resisting, even when there is no resistance. There was recently yet another video of a young man being slammed to the ground, and there's full video of himself and the arresting officer yelling, stop resisting, and the young man's just standing there with his hands behind his back, ready to be cuffed, saying, I'm not resisting. Yet the officer still slammed him to the ground and said, you're resisting. So it feels like we can't come out of these situations with our dignity at all. We have to just flop on the ground, but even then when we're on the ground, we just get a knee put in our neck.
Yeah, and it's a trauma, and I felt it was palpable what was going on in this community moving forward into the verdict. You could feel it, right? And it was something that reflected the way that the community feels, especially black men feel about the police department, right? There's all this training at the kitchen table that happens to get our young men to make sure that they're safe from people who they're supposed to be safe from, right? Absolutely. They're supposed to be protecting them, right? And so there's a lot of that, and we have black men and black boys, and then we have their mothers and their fathers. We have a whole community that is tense when an officer approaches them. And I'm not sure if the general population understands that, but it's such a well-known commodity here in our community that it's really sad, and it's generational.
For most of my life, I used to shake just seeing the police. I remember my ex-girlfriend, she used to get mad, like, why are you shaking? And I couldn't even answer the question. It's just something that I've been raised to do. I've been from all of these instances that's happened with the police, unjustified, even when I know I'm not doing anything wrong. And this is bigger than a current issue. I'm glad we have all the cameras now. I think it was 10 times worse before everybody had cameras. Then they knew they could get away with it. You know, and you often hear, well, it's just a couple of bad apples, or it's not everybody, and it's okay. Well, if we recognize bad apples and get rid of them, and I forgot who said this, but it made a lot of sense. Like, some jobs, you just can't have bad apples. You can't say, well, these pilots, some of them crash and some of them don't. No, we don't want anybody crashing. And this is not a new thing. And if you think of the history of the police, they were created and designed to protect slave masters' property and catch runaway slaves. So in their very inception, it's doing exactly what they were created to do. So there needs to be an entire redesign, new recruitment methods, new training, and once bad apples are spotted, they need to be alleviated or gone fast. And and you have many people that are going into the police force. Not everybody. I know some good officers, but then you have people that are just plain and simple racist, and they're using that badge to cover up and to do the dirty work. They don't need to put on the hood anymore. They can operate under that badge and do the same work that they're doing, lock people away for years, planting. I know of many people that have had drugs planted on them, guns planted on them, falsified police reports. So even if it's not the beating that's caught on film, if it's not a murder, there are people that are sitting in jail right now with false charges right now behind bad apples.
Okay. Mike, I'm going to ask you this question. What do you think is the root cause of this? Are Black men in particular being targeted for some particular reason?
I think our communities are, yes. I believe that right now we are dealing with a police force that over-polices our communities in search of crime. And that's why you have incidents like what Armand is referring to, where you have crimes being created by the police and place blame on members of that community. Our communities are
You've seen evidence of this.
Absolutely. I grew up in Southeast San Diego. My son is 14 now. He's a couple years younger than I was the first time I was stopped by the police and added to a gang database. I was just on my way home from football practice after school, and they stopped and decided that I needed to have a lot of trouble getting a job when I reached adulthood because of my background check moving forward. So I know what police do in this community because I'm from this community, and I still live in this community and work and operate here. So when I say that the police are aggressively pursuing crime instead of aggressively pursuing protecting and serving this community, that's exactly what I mean.
How were you able to overcome that, them putting you in the gang database?
I think I aged out of it, and at some point, I want to say maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, there was an opportunity to purge myself from that, and I took that opportunity. But it's something that followed me around the country. When I would apply for jobs, when a background check would normally take just a couple days, I was waiting weeks because there was something that happened in California that we need to look into. And then once they finally looked into it, of course, they just saw that my name was added to this database, and that's all there was to it. But the impact that it had on my prospects as a very young man was very significant.
People can put these as these are opinions, but then you have like literal data that was recently done by San Diego State University just on the police stops, and just finding that I don't want to misquote the numbers, but I was a president in the city council when this report came out just about how many Black people were stopped in comparison to their white counterparts, and far less likely to be caught with contraband, drugs, weapons than their white counterparts, but still being stopped. So there's actual data from universities that back up our lived experience.
Mr. Tony, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, we've, as a policymaker, I've seen a number of reports about this, and it's not just our city, it's throughout the country. And going to what Armand and Mike have talked about, really, it has to be, individuals are going to be there. They're going to be racist individuals in all institutions, education, police, banking. We can housing, all kinds of different situations. But in reality, what we need to do is change the institutions and make sure that the policies within those institutions make it so that an individual like that can't take advantage of that institution and harm other individuals. And that's where I see things are going right now, which I think that's a good sign. Of course, it was terrible to see what happened, but also, and I saw a lot of the folks who were out there protesting and advocating, but now I also see an advocacy for policy change and institutional change, and really that's really what needs to happen. And there's been a start of that, but I think there's more that needs to be done.
Okay. What are your thoughts about the legislation that is being proposed in the Senate? I don't know the exact name of it, but it's attached to George Floyd and police reform.
Well, what you're seeing is the federal legislation is reflecting what's happening on the ground, right? So if you know that Mayor Gloria has presented his plan, many mayors throughout the country have presented a plan on how to reform police departments and not make them such a leverage to put people of color in jail. And so what you're seeing is that the federal government is that policy that our new administration is doing is reflective of that. And I think there's certain things that the federal government can do, but I think where the real action is in these counties and also the municipalities that a lot of people of color live, or actually really all over the country. That's really where the action is.
Okay. I know that Board Supervisor Nathan Fletcher recently declared racism as a public health emergency or crisis here in San Diego County. Armand, what are your thoughts about that, and do you think it'll actually help?
I think we're living in a very, very monumental time right now where these issues are actually brought from the county's board of supervisor level. 5 years ago, you would have never heard something like that. And I'm grateful for, Nathan Fletcher for even bringing that issue to the table. And I see these appearing throughout all of our levels of politics. So all of this stuff sounds good, and I believe they have the heart and the passion behind it. But now as the people need to support those things as they come and push these issues. But yeah, it's been racism has been a health crisis for my lifetime, my grandmother's lifetime, and some. So
yes, yeah, I think it was. Sorry for interrupting, Armand. I
please.
think it was really significant, and I appreciate Supervisor Fletcher and the Board of Supervisors, and also the City Council who's doing some of the same type of work. But I don't want anybody to forget that this is spurred by the advocacy that happened on the streets and the advocates who have basically guided some of these elected officials to come up with policies that reflect the issues that were being discussed. And that's really important. So the Board of Supervisors, great job in going to that measure, but I think they will all recognize that it came from the people. And that's really how it has to change.
Okay. I think this will be our final question. I want to talk about the verdict and just give me your personal thoughts about the unanimous guilty vote that came in, found guilty on all 3 charges. Mike, I'll start with you.
I think the jury made a statement with not only how quickly they came to their verdict, but how strong the verdict was, that they didn't compromise. They said he is guilty on all charges, because he is. That we had to have a trial like that speaks to the greatness of America, that you can have video evidence of a crime being committed and still take it to trial and not immediately go to a punishment phase. But that there was a defense mounted that put Mr. Floyd on trial for dying that day means that America has a lot further to go than it's come.
Okay. But how did it make you feel?
When the verdict came down, I parked my car and I cried. I bawled, and my daughter was in my car with me, and I think she kind of understood, but I explained it to her that it means that should I meet my end at the hands of an officer, that now there's a chance that he'll be held to account. Because until now, we've been getting killed in the streets and in our homes. Breonna Taylor was shot in her home. And hardly anyone's been held accountable for that. It just means that we didn't matter. And now we're starting to see that maybe we do.
Okay. Mr. Tony, I'm going to kind of segue a little bit. I do want to know how you feel about the verdict, but how do you respond to people who say, but look at the numbers in Chicago? Do their lives not matter? There's a lot of crime and violence with African Americans in the African American community.
For sure.
And I have seen this online a lot, so I want your opinion about what happens in the Black community as far as gun violence is concerned, and does that have anything to do with police brutality?
I don't think it has anything to do with police brutality at all. And I'm sitting next to two individuals who have advocated to stop the type of violence that we have in our community against each other. And I acknowledge that, and that's something that needs, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And there are a lot of things that we can do to continue to work to make sure that, that we don't kill each other here in this community. But it's not the same as someone who is a sworn officer who is supposed to be protecting the community and has the full weight of the government to be able to do and sometimes act with impunity in many cases for a number of years since this country has started. It's not the same thing. And so those that are so concerned about that, which I appreciate that, I would love for them to continue to advocate for that change, but they're also they need to understand there's a differentiation between those two issues, and we have to address them in a different way.
So tell me how you felt when the verdict came down yesterday.
Well, you know, I can tell you I felt like this issue was very important for the community. It was important to me. But to be honest with you, I also can't help but think that how many different times in this country this has happened where someone didn't go to jail for. And so my feelings are for all the Black men or people of color who have dealt with this issue. And so my feelings were for that trial, and it was important. There was a guilty verdict, but my feelings are diffused throughout this entire country when it comes to, I know what happens all over these communities like that.
Okay. And lastly, Armand, what are your thoughts about the verdict and how it impacted you?
So it impacted me greatly, but I had already expected the guilty verdict. I had never seen, because I've witnessed these trials before, witnessed people who we knew murdered somebody. Like I said, I saw Rodney King's trial, and people who were very much so guilty and caught on film walk.
But you expected
I
guilty.
expected guilty, because never in the history, in my lifetime of seeing multiple of these cases, had I seen a chief of police come down and say, yeah, he was wrong. A training officer say, yes, he was wrong. I've never seen that before. So when that happened, I said, oh, either he's the sacrificial lamb, because the streets will go crazy. Had they come with a not guilty verdict, we'd be on fire right now. So it's like, is he the sacrificial lamb? But it was so blatant, and at this height of consciousness and people that are pointing to this, and people of all races for the first time that I've noticed are standing up, not just Black people against police brutality. You see all nationalities standing up. So at this level, I knew it was going to happen. So I expected it, and when it happened, I ran outside, and we had a group of other community leaders and members out there doing what we do and feeding the community, and I yelled it to all of them, and everybody was like, yes. You know, so I knew it was going to happen. I'm glad it happened, and now I'm like, let that be the statement, be a statement to those in the future who are used to getting away with this, who think I can take this black life that always has mattered. And unfortunately, we've had to make it known in a statement that black lives mattered, because they have not mattered to others. So I'm glad that verdict went down like it did. And now, hopefully, people think twice. People behind the badge think twice before they just take a black life and think they're going to get away with it. So, but now the job's not done. We have, 4 more officers that were right there and let it happen? They were 3 more?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They were accessory to murder. Let's see them get charged accordingly.
And I heard a soundbite somewhere that said that there's a record number of officers retiring right now. After this verdict came out, there's a record number of officers opting to retire now. That says a lot to me about the state of policing in this country. Right now, it's too easy to become a police officer. And frankly, it's too easy to stay a police officer once you've been found out to be a bad apple. We've seen cops get fired from one jurisdiction and just go to the neighboring jurisdiction and be hired. And they're able to continue the same assaults against some of the same community members that they've been pestering their entire career. So I will say this, I wasn't happy when I heard the verdict. A man lost his life. It did bring us here. But there's nothing to be happy about there. The feeling that I felt was more relief, that finally we're able to get, somebody understands that this is an issue we've been talking about for a long time. Armand brought up the sergeant who was punished with pepper spray for not making the foolish mistake of putting his hand back in the car so the officer could shoot him in that incident. He was in full uniform. When Colin Kaepernick tried to tell the world that we have a police problem by just kneeling, we were disrespecting the troops. And we just came to find out that this was never about disrespecting the troops. We were just not supposed to speak up about it.
Mr. Tony, I'm going to give you a final thought to summarize kind of what we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for allowing us to speak to you. And there was a name that was invoked here. His name was Sagan Penn. Mm-hmm. And Sagan Penn was had a confrontation with police officers off of Imperial Avenue about 25, 30 years ago. Yep. And that is our issue here in San Diego. That's the one that we judge everything through when it comes to police community interaction. And it's really going to be about us continue to advocate for these issues. If we have to take it to the streets, we should do that. But also, I think part of the change had to do with the fact that there were people in certain positions that had the power to change the scenario that has historically happened. The police chief, like you said, who was able to testify against the police officer, was someone of color who understood these issues in a certain way. You have different elected officials who look at these issues in a different way. And I think if we continue to put people in leadership and for us to continue to have action, I think there will be some additional change. But there is a long way to go on this.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.